Peace, peace. This your host, Selah-Shalom. And this is the Cosmon teachings and the words of Jehovah and his angel ambassadors from the Cosmon Bible, OAHSPE. And the topic of discussion today is called the tree of language. Now, what is the origin of language? Now, according to scholars, they date language back to the hieroglyphs of Egypt and the cuneiform of Sumerian. But these systems are only 6,000 years old, which is very young in the scope of the planet. Now, the Egyptian and Sumerian cuneiform and hieroglyphs go back to about 3300 BC. Now, based off the timetables of prophecy that OAHSPE lays out, this took place in the 23rd arc cycle after the creation of mortals, called the Ark of Speda, between the years of 3953 BC to 1553 BC. Is the length of the 23rd arc cycle, which would fit the time period that the cuneiform and the Egyptian hieroglyphs came on the scene. Now, in OAHSPE, it states that mortals were given the first written language over 75,000 years ago, which would be the first arc cycle after the creation of mortals, called the Ark of Rain, where the first language was revealed to mortals by the angels. And we do have pictorial glyphs that predate both Egypt and Sumer, over tens of thousands of years old, such as the cave paintings of North Spain, which archaeologists date around 40,000 years and more, which would be the same time period that the Grimaldi's of Africa went into that region. And another site that is just as old, coming out of France, dates back to around 30,000 BCE, before the Common Era, 30,000 years ago. And then in Australia, you have the artwork on the rock going back to about 40,000 years ago. So these are the earliest writing systems discovered so far. Now, in the first book of the First Lords, chapter 4, verse 1 through 4, it states, verse 1, about the time man began to use his lips and tongue in enunciating words, prior to which he spoke in the thorax. Now, when we observe a baby which has no speech, no language, no alphabet, the baby utters sounds from the thorax, which is the chest region, prior to learning how to express sounds using his lips and tongue. Now, if a baby is never given an alphabet, regardless of what language it is, the baby will never know how to speak. It'll just be uttering sounds. Goo goo gaga would be the language. And in this case, the very first mortals, the primitive man, was in this condition. So just imagine a bunch of full-grown adults uttering sounds like a baby, and this was the condition of the first race, or the first mortals, prior to learning language, showing you that everything has a development. We just didn't pop up on the scene knowing all things. Just like a baby, when he comes into the world, he just doesn't come into the world knowing all things. He comes in crawling, goo goo gaga, and he has to learn through the steps. Likewise with man in the beginning. Now, verse 2, and the Lord spoke unto the Ains, the sacred little people, that the labor of the Lord thy God may be remembered on earth. Go provide me a stone, and I will engrave it with my own hand, and it shall be called Simuin, because it shall be a testimony unto all nations and peoples on the earth of the first written language in all the world. Verse 3, and the Ains, the sacred little people, prepared a stone, and hewed it flat, and then polished it smooth. And the Lord came down in the night, and engraved it. And the Lord explained it. Through his angels taught he, the Ains, the sacred little people, the meaning of the characters engraved thereon.
Tribal legend tells us that beings called Numo descended from the sacred star and appeared before the Dogon ancestors. The Dogon were entrusted by the Numo with 366 symbols, given without meaning. The Dogon were charged with interpreting them and preserving the information for future generations.
Verse 4, and the Lord said, go into all the cities and countries of the world, and provide ye copies like unto the tablets I have given. So it came to pass the angels in heaven inspired the Ains to make tablets and to read them, that the first language of the earth, panic, may be preserved to the races of men. And it was so. So this verse renders up that the first language first was revealed by the angels.
These caves and caverns, we can feel the influence of the spirits of our ancestors. If you sleep here, you can see them in your dreams and receive their messages. They come and fill you with their strength, and when you wake, you feel very good. You can find paintings made by our forefathers in which speak of the dream time, the creation, and how they lived 50,000 years ago.
And the language was a petroglyph system, as seen in the cave paintings over 40,000 years ago. Now, the next mention concerning language in the OAHSPE is during the 19th arc cycle after the creation of mortals, called the Ark of Mos, being 15,000 years from the present time, where mortals began to engrave images on all things upon the earth. And you can find petroglyphs from the UK, Nevada, North Africa, all coinciding with this time period. Now, in the Lord's fourth book, chapter 1, verse 2 through 10, it states, God said, Behold, with my sacred people have I established myself in written words. Now hath it come to pass that all the races of men on earth shall be made to know me. Verse 3, God commanded man to make stone and wood images and engravings also of everything upon the earth, and man so made them according to his own knowledge. Verse 4, God said, As every living creature has a name, so shall the image thereof and the engraving thereof have the same name. And even so shall it be with all things on the earth, and the waters thereof, and the air above the earth. The image and engraving image shall have the same name, even as the real things themselves. Verse 5, And God sent his angels down to man to inspire him in the workmanship of images and engravings. And man thus accomplished the commandments of God. Verse 6, And these were the first writings since the flood. Other than such were kept sacred among the Ains, the sacred little people. And of this matter was the writing. Verse 7, A picture of a man was a man. A picture of a tree was a tree. A picture of a bird was a bird. And even so was everything represented by its own name and image. Verse 8, Then God said, When thou hast made the picture of the spear, behold, it is a spear. And when thou desirest to show which way a man goeth, thou shalt add to the engraven image the likeness of a spear, and the way it pointeth shall show the way man goeth. Even so shall thou express the going of everything on earth and in heaven. Verse 9, Thus made man a written language, and in every region of the earth by many men were these things done, according to the light of God upon them. So accomplished they the written language of thousands of tribes of men. Verse 10, God said, This shall be called the panic language, earth language, because it is made of earthly images. And in after ages, whosoever desires to find the first written words of men shall have recourse to the pictures of all things on earth, and in the waters, and in the air above the earth. See that? And the petroglyphs from the UK, Nevada, In North Africa, the Sahara rock art all coincide with this time period, being 15 to 12,000 years ago, being the time period of the 19th arc cycle after the creation of mortals. Now, in the Lord's first book, chapter 1, verse 72, it states, God said, now was the world of one language and one speech, and all the places of my people spoke they alike, man to man. And here is the comparison of this universal language coming from Africa, Europe, Australia, and North America. And this was the first system of writing since the sinking of the continent of Pan, or the Deluge. Which you have in your Bible as the flood, which took place 25,000 years ago, during the 17th arc cycle after the creation of mortals, called the Ark of Noah. And even the petroglyphs at the ancient ruins in west central Idaho, right here in America, there is a legend among the Native Americans about a galactic war that took place around 30,000 years ago, which fits the same time period of the sinking of Pan, being the 17th arc cycle. Showing you some correlation. And I got videos on the sinking of Pan. If you go into the flood accounts, you'll see what took place. Now in India, prior to Sanskrit and the Vedas, you had a language the OAHSPE describes as the Yeehaw language, the language of Babel, being a vast multitude of words to describe one word. So for example, for the word tree, it may contain 15 to 17 letters to describe that one word. So if you had a sentence of 17 to 20 words, the words were so vast that the language became confounded, being Babel. And this is the root of the ideology in the Bible where it speaks of the Tower of Babel. And this time period is during the 20th arc cycle after the creation of mortals, being called the Ark of Daid, being 12,000 years from the present time. Now, the Lord's fifth book, chapter 2, verse 4 through 12, it states, in the early days of the Ains, the sacred little people, the Lord spoke through the chief prophet, saying, when the inhabitants of one city or tribe marry with those of another city or tribe, behold, it is but just that the name of the father and mother be given to the offspring. Verse 5, but men were in darkness in those days and understood not God. So accordingly, the inhabitants combined the name belonging to the neighboring tribes. That is to say, one tribe said, oop, for wheat. Another tribe said, yat, for the same thing. And another tribe said, what? And another, who? And so on. The after generation said, oot, yat, wat, who, for the word wheat. And this was called the Yeehaw language. And so great were the number and size of words used that the writings of the ancient prophets were lost, because no one could understand them. Verse 6, the Lord spoke, saying, because I desire to preserve the genealogy of my chosen, ye have applied the laws to things that are worthless in my sight. Ye have built a Babel, a tower of words, so that your tongue are confounded one with another. Ye strove to reach heaven with the multitude of words, but made food for Hades. So here the Tower of Babel is referred to the multiplicity of words. Verse 7, the Lord said, come now into Merdon, the spirit circle, and I will deliver you. So the people sat in crescents, and the Lord came between the horns, saying, behold, ye are tall, but I am Sarah, spirit. My words shall stand against all worlds. Verse 8, hear then the commandment of God, because ye have built a tower of words, ye are confounded. But I come not in anger, but to deliver you. Neither will I write more, nor teach written words, for they are only folly except to the learned. Now here's the origin of the Vedas as a result of this confounded language. Verse 9. By mouth words will I teach, and ye shall repeat after me, and these shall be sacred words to the end of the world. Verse 10. So the Lord taught orally in the temple, face to face with the people, and they learned the words and the meanings thereof. See that? Now the people of India claim that the knowledge, the Vedas, are according to the modern Sanskrit, a purasiya, meaning not the work of mankind or beyond human imagination. And a purasiya, shabda, means words not created by mankind. So the Vedas, as described in their own text, state that these words came not by man, but by angels. Verse 11. And those who learned the best, the Lord named Jiv, because he made them teachers over others. The Lord said, because ye have confounded the language of the ancients, I will give you a new language, and it shall be called Vedi, in parentheses, perfect, against all my enemies, nor shall any man more meddle with the words I give. So here it gives you the origin of the Veda, or the Vedas, taking place within the length of the 20th arc cycle, being 12,000 years to about 9,000 years ago. And the Dravidian people of India are said to be some of the oldest people occupying India. Being the Indus Valley civilization, like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. So I'm showing you how these arc cycles place up with the time period in history that OAHSPE is rendering up. Now, the Lord's 5th book, chapter 3, verse 6, it states, Behold, the multiple languages of Shem, side by side with the tribe of Japheth, raised I them. The derivation of the panic language of this day, referring to the Chinese. Verse 7. For I gave unto the tribes of these two different lands my 10 commandments and my 10 invocations, to be not written, but spoken and taught from mouth to ear, to be sacred in the language given. So with this verse being said, the language was learned orally before it was written down.
We elders have the important task of initiating the young into our customs, explaining our history to them, and teaching them to respect the traditional laws.
This is why most ancient records speak of oral stories that precede the writing accounts. Now, verse 9, for I locked up a sufficient of the panic language in Japheth as a testimony to be discovered in after years, showing that unlike Ham and Shem, a mighty nation could retain one language for thousands of years. And when we observe the Chinese or the Asian language, they still apply the petroglyph system in the language, compared to us in the West, where our language has no petroglyphs, but characters. I'm speaking of our modern language. Now, verse 10, for I foresaw that philosophers would try to prove that language of one mortal origin, and that they would change according to the growth of knowledge amongst men. And this is true. Many scholars ignore the fact that the angels first inspired these early writing systems. And the proof again is among the Dogons in Africa.
Tribal legend tells us that beings called Numo descended from the sacred star and appeared before the Dogon ancestors. The Dogon were entrusted by the Numo with 366 symbols given without meaning. The Dogon were charged with interpreting them and preserving the information for future generations.
And the Dogon say that Nomo came down and gave them glyphs and symbols to interpret, while the original Australian said the same thing.
In these caves and caverns, we can feel the influence of the spirits of our ancestors. If you sleep here, you can see them in your dreams and receive their messages. They come and fill you with their strength, and when you wake, you feel very good.
And these two different tribes have no contact with each other. So I'm showing you the spiritual system in order. So we do have proof of these spiritual communications in modern times. I'm showing you living primary sources. Now here I will go into the origin of the Phoenician language. The time period being the 23rd arc cycle after the creation of mortals, called the Ark of Spita, being 6,000 to 3,500 years ago, the length within the 23rd arc cycle. Now, the Book of Wars Against Jehovah, chapter 21, verse 5, it states, in olden times, the gods had inspired the Persians to migrate toward the west and inhabit Hellas, also a country of giants, but less given to rites and ceremonies. And they carried with them 3 languages, the Panic of Japheth, the Vedic of India, or Shem, and the Persian. And because they used the same sounds mostly, but different written characters, a confused language sprang out of these and was called Phoenician. That is to say, we will use the same sounds, but take to our judgment to use whatsoever written characters and words. Jehovah had said, in that respect, man on earth hath advanced enough to stand alone. And it was so. For from that time to this, neither Jehovah nor his angels hath given any new language or written characters to mortals. And all languages that have come from that time onward are but combinations and branches and amalgamations and malformations of what existed then on the earth. See that? So the Phoenician language is the first man-made language, meaning extracting symbols and characters from the previous existing writing systems, being the African hieroglyphic system, being the petroglyphs and pictorials, being the cuneiform, and being some of the petroglyphs and pictorial images coming from India and Asia. So the Phoenician language is the first man-made language, meaning extracting symbols and characters from previous existing writing systems. But these writing systems was given by the angels.
Tribal legend tells us that beings called Numo descended from the sacred star and appeared before the Dogon ancestors. The Dogon were entrusted by the Numo with 366 symbols given without meaning. The Dogon were charged with interpreting them and preserving the information for future generations.
And the oldest writing systems coming out of Africa, the hieroglyphic system, which are petroglyphs and pictorial images, along with the cuneiform, which would be Persian. Being that this is the language of the time period fitted for the creation of the Phoenician language. And it's funny because we know the origin of the Phoenician language, but we do not know the origin of the Kemetic hieroglyphs, the Sumerian cuneiform. There is no Egyptian papyrus or no Sumerian cuneiform clay tablet explaining how their glyphs and scripts came about. But OAHSPE gives us heads up that the angels are the missing link to the origin of language, along with the proof of the Dogon and the original Australian. See that? Now, out of the Phoenician language came so-called Hebrew, the Sabian language, the Aramaic language, the Ge'ez language, the Amharic language, the Nabatean, the Syriac, the Arabic, the Greek, Latin, and English. And this is the tree of language based on OAHSPE and historical records and evidence. See that? And with that, I'd like to say peace and blessings. Shalom.